This is Abdul Saad, clinical psychologist here at Vital Mind Psychology in Sydney, Australia. And in today's video, we will be continuing with our discussion on panic attacks and panic disorder. And in this second video, I want to focus on the potential childhood origins of panic attacks and panic disorder and the personality traits that are associated with the development of panic attacks and panic disorder in adolescence and adulthood. Now the information I'm going to present, I'm going to be discussing in this video is based on a mix of clinical experience as well as published research. As with all of these videos where we talk about childhood origins, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I will be talking about some of the broad themes that I've found that adults who present with panic disorder tend to present with. So let's begin. Some of the, I guess, broad themes and common features of individuals who end up developing panic attacks and subsequently a panic disorder include being fearful, nervous, or shy as children, especially in response to unfamiliar environments. People who develop panic attacks and panic disorder frequently remember having at least one parent who was, they describe as angry, frightening, critical, or controlling. So they were frightened or intimidated by at least one of their parents, typically when you look at their developmental history. These are individuals who typically are uncomfortable with asserting their needs. They tend to adopt quite a passive or a passive-aggressive approach to conflict. So there's troubles with assertion, they're uncomfortable with asserting themselves, with having proper boundaries. And often in individuals who go on to suffer from panic attacks and develop panic disorder, there's an increased tendency toward chronic feelings of lowered self-esteem, feelings of inadequacy, lowered self-confidence, lowered confidence in their capacity to deal with stressors and setbacks. And this tends to create, for people who go on to develop panic disorder, increased dependency on others in their relationships. Now, in the face of a critical, controlling, or frightening parent, this child very often becomes very hyper-aware of their bodily reactions and their need to control these bodily reactions around such a parent. So remember, this is a child that typically has quite a sensitive nervous system, is shy, is very easily experiences physiological hyper-arousal of their nervous system. But around a critical, controlling, judgmental person, the child, judgmental parent, the child has to keep that in check. So in a sense, the nervous system is always on edge in this threat detection mode, but one or both parents is an unreliable source of safety and protection for the child. So the child finds themselves in a bind in relation to the controlling, frightening, and critical parent. Their other parent may typically is more passive and more fearful themselves and is also an unreliable source of safety and support. So the bind is the child has to depend on this parent while at the same time being fearful of them. So the child goes on to develop feelings of anger and resentment toward the critical and controlling parent, but learns that they need to suppress their anger for fear of angering the parent, which may result in the parent abandoning them or punishing them. So as this dynamic continues, the child habitually suppresses their anger and resentment, turning it inward upon themselves. They begin to develop what is known as an inflated psychological judge or an internal critic, and a strong internal critic which heavily judges them for even the slightest imperfection. As this psychological judge, as this internal critic continues to inflate under these less than optimal conditions I've described within the family environment, this inflated judge or internal critic continues into adolescence and adulthood, creating even further disconnection of the individual from their feelings and from their body. And this is the sort of person who into adolescence and adulthood goes into managing conflict in their relationships by suppressing anger and through various defense mechanisms where they transform anger into opposing emotions like warmth, agreeableness, a defense mechanism known as a reaction formation, which neutralizes anger, because often in the personality style of such an individual, anger is viewed as a big no-no, as something that is bad, that is wrong, and must be suppressed at all costs. So eventually the combination of a hypersensitive nervous system, emotional suppression, especially of resentment and anger, and being fearful and dependent upon others in their relationships sets the stage for the first panic attack and the development of panic disorder. The first panic attack is often preceded by a heightened stress and is characterized by heightened levels of feelings of frustration, resentment, and suppressed anger, where the person has not been able to deal with a particular conflict or issue in their life in a straightforward, assertive manner. For example, what may precede a panic attack is being stuck in a job where the person feels exploited but they're fearful to speak out. They may be in a non-reciprocal relationship where they're feeling used and being taken advantage of, but they may be highly dependent upon that person which they need to assert their needs with, which creates an internal conflict and the suppression of the anger, resentment, frustration, what have you. So the individual who suffers from panic attacks, according to the model I'm outlining here, is unable to reconcile their feelings of anger, rage, and resentment with their internalized image of being a good little boy or a good little girl, even as an adult. And this is the image they had to preserve in the face of that critical, controlling, threatening parent. Emotional suppression can only work for so long, and it reaches its limit and culminates in the experience of a panic attack, which is a literal explosion of raw emotional and physiological energy, as the mind-body system is no longer able to maintain homeostatic balance and clamp down on those suppressed emotions, especially of anger, because you've got to realize that emotional suppression is incredibly costly, energetically costly upon the body, and it can't be maintained forever. So hopefully in this video I've given you a sense, a taste for some of the potential childhood origins, developmental antecedents, as well as the personality dynamics that develop from those origins that may set the stage or make an individual more vulnerable to experiencing panic attacks into adolescence and adulthood. And of course, if these underlying factors aren't addressed in treatment, then it's more likely that treatment for panic attacks, psychological treatment, is not going to give long-lasting benefits. Hope that was of help, because in the next video I'm going to be discussing the role of suppressed anger in panic attacks. I'll be looking at the suppression of this particular emotion in a lot more detail, because I believe it is a critical component to understanding the development and the maintenance of panic attacks. So I'll see you next week, God willing. Take care.